And Ari, our work together, I it is kind I always try to put it into words because I'm a writer and I'm supposed to be good at putting things into words, but what I had to share was so huge, and yet it was sort of in a seed form when
Mm.
I first started talking with you. Just your incredible patience and presence is medicine in and of itself.
Thank you.
It's very rare,
Mm.
and that is something that is always going to be held in my heart. So,
Thank you so much for that. I so appreciate that, and just the resonance of every single meeting between us. I mean, just really felt like we were doing something alchemical together from the beginning. And so I just really appreciate your perspective and also wonder about, how would you describe the work from sort of the arc of the experience of creating a podcast series with me as your media midwife in the story womb.
well, I think on one hand, it feels like a leap into the unknown. Like I have no idea what is going to unfold, but just beginning with a sense of trust that Ari like is going to, be this container, this holder of the process to begin, to roll back the rock and let the stories come out. And the image that comes to me is like an ancient image of like a wise woman named Ari inviting someone, Maura, to like a campfire or like an ancient fire, and like saying, "Sit down here and tell me the stories of your soul. Tell me what you know." And I only think those who come to the fire are those who are ready to finally share not only what they need to share, but what the world needs to hear. And how we started with exploring the themes of what these 6 podcasts were going to be about, and one by one going through that process where you're asking me questions and really honing in on what's not been shared, like the emotion hiding that wants to come out. Your profound ability to honor these deep, poignant truths when you hear them, when I uttered them, to feel that sense of being seen and heard, um, hugely transformational. And it gave me more courage to keep sharing my story, which is a vulnerable thing to do.
How has this work changed you? How has it transformed you?
I think working together, I realized that this body of work is hugely significant and is a contribution to the world rather than it just being an interesting idea I had. I mean, about the life uh, shaping significance of our first 14 years at that soul level. So there's like this validation that has been very empowering. That I can now talk about this work with other people as like, oh, this is something that we need to think about that can be really helpful for us in terms of how we see ourselves as humans and our evolution. At this particular time, when there's so much in the external world that's scary, it's like a new way of looking at ourselves. And so there's just the huge affirmation of like, yes, this is real. This is something. This is matter. This is not, just a interesting philosophy that belongs on the academic bookshelf someplace.
I love that. What would you say to someone who is feeling ready and they're kind of on the fence? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say that one of my resistances for a while was that God, there's so many podcasts out there, you know. In fact, there's so much out there all over the place. Like, does the world need one more podcast? But I think, you know, I think it's the message really is listening to that inner voice inside that says, you know, if you don't do this, you're stunting your own uh, evolution. And therefore, that has impact on the field. So I think it's normal to feel the resistance, but then to see beyond that and say, well, what if this is inevitable that I really am meant to do this? And possibly things will come from the podcast that you can't even imagine.
You're tapping into a well inside of yourself that it's calling us to energize the field in such an externally devastating moment, that interior strength needed right now to navigate the unknown and navigate these times is so significant, that the courage that it takes to come forward, it's so empowering for the listener because they feel energized to feel into their stories. And so I just really appreciate the way that we found the universal threads that connect with your
You
listeners.
know, you're just not producing podcasts. You know, if you say to somebody a podcast, like, oh, they think of two people chatting at each other as if it's some sort of, you know, a pop culture TV show kind of format. So even though this is a podcast, this is like something beyond a podcast, and that there is search for something that is more genuine and authentic. And how do we get there? So I think that that is something that feels really palpable in the work that you do, you know. And so I think in the olden times, people would go on pilgrimages. You know, now a lot of people go on the Camino, or in the olden times, they would go to the Oracle at Delphi in, you know, Greece, because people were looking for something. People were looking to like rise above the noise of the crowd and like reconnect with some eternal truth that would just open their eyes, the eyes of their heart, not just these eyes. So I think that this is the kind of artfully produced podcast realm that you operate in. You know, it is connecting to those ancient forms of storytelling and pilgrimage of the heart to unfold these truths that oftentimes in everyday life, where else do we hear them? Yeah, and I think the way that you produce these episodes, you know, you're not only like helping the story come out and holding the space for that, and certainly when guests come on the episodes, they can feel that too from you, you know. But then all of the work you do with like the music and the sound effects and the editing and creating, you know, helping to shape that arc. You know, that's like the magic. It feels like the magic fairy dust of this all. You know, it's so organic, and yet it's its own story because of the beautiful work that you put into creating that respect for um, what we long to hear. You know, like it's just not my voice talking or somebody else's voice talking. It's this underbody of work, of the sound and the music and all of that you put in, that soundscape that is a gift like gold, which I know has something to do with your last name, but we've heard that before. I would never have done a podcast if I hadn't found you, honestly. I mean, yeah. So that's how I chose you. You blew in and on the wind, and I was ready to just to catch you. Well, I assume that you have a line out your door with other clients that want to work with you. And so any time that I get to spend with you is like the highlight of my day, because you bring such light yourself and such authenticity that you know, I've missed you since our last being on Zoom together. And so I really
Oh,
appreciate your presence is just it's so unique.